Hello, welcome to the Bigger Truth Podcast. I am Scott McMahon, and thank you for joining us. We today we this is I've been looking forward to this for some time. Actually, since I very first spoke with Eric, almost I don't know, Eric, was it 3 months ago? I think we first talked almost 3 months ago. It was right after I first published. About 2 months ago, right after I first published the piece on 5 states that included some information about Idaho, and we were introduced. And that conversation, I remember exactly where I was. It was one of those conversations. I remember exactly where I was because it just blew me away. So if you are here, we welcome if you're here live, we welcome your questions and your comments, and we'll get to them as we can. So first of all, Eric, thank you so much for being here. Could you start with just kind of telling just the short version of your story, because your story is amazing and crazy. But if you could just kind of start with just the short version, just to introduce yourself, I'll let you introduce yourself to the audience. You're muted now. There you go.
Sorry about that.
Perfect.
All right. Got that out of the way. So I didn't hear you. Did you ask me a question?
Yeah. Could you, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself, and tell your story. Just briefly give us kind of the treetop view and orient us to, how you got where you are today, and how you got involved in you founded the Three Percenters in Idaho, correct?
Yeah.
And, how you came to that, and we'll go from there.
Started back in 2014. Well, my name's Eric Parker. Back in 2014, I saw some videos online. Federal land management agents, BLM. There was a protest going on in southern Nevada, and the reaction to that protest was heavy-handed, to say the least, in my opinion. Saw some video of people being tased, dogs being sicked on people, people being body slammed, and that bothered me, made me curious. So I started looking into this situation about what was going on down there. Came across the governor's statement on the situation. He called it a real physical limitation to the First Amendment and an atmosphere of intimidation. I agreed.
What were those protests? What was being protested there?
There was a roundup of a rancher named Ammon Bundy's cattle. He had been protesting and whatnot with his cattle and land issues and grazing permits and different stuff. They got to the point where they were going out there to round up his cattle. And, I don't really have too much of an opinion on that. I'm not a rancher. I like cheeseburgers and steak, but other than that, for me, it was really about the reaction to the protest and the heavy-handedness. One of the things we saw was a photo of snipers up on the hill above an arrest. The arrest was for not protesting in a First Amendment area that the Bureau of Land Management had established. So yeah, all these things, the snipers specifically, wanted to get my head around it. So I decided I was going to drive down there and see for myself, basically with the intention to protest the First Amendment areas. That's really why I was going. Got down there late the night before the standoff, what they call the standoff. Set up a tent, woke up in the morning. I had never spoke to any of the Bundys or Didn't know any of them. Got up in the morning, and the sheriff from Clark County was supposed to meet with the protesters. Went out to the stage, watched the sheriff get up on the stage and say that the BLM was ceasing their operation, leaving the area. So basically, we figured it was over. And about an hour later, Cliven sent the cowboys over to see if the cows were still in the pens. Protesters followed the cowboys. We jumped in a truck with the protesters and ended up over on the interstate. Was hanging out on the side of the road for a little while, and a lady came running down the interstate saying they're pointing guns at protesters in the wash. They're threatening to shoot protesters in the wash. I was probably about 500 yards away. I didn't even know there was a wash down there. But apparently a lot of people had been flowing down around the other way and into this wash. So we walked, me and two of the friends I went with, walked down the interstate, ended up on a bridge, overpass over this wash. Borrowed a pair of binoculars and looked around, looked down the wash. Saw a lot of people, camouflage, full battle gear, helmets, vests, ARs over the trucks, shooting positions up on the hilltops around the wash. Sat there for a minute and kind of took it all in. All these protesters started to flow into the center of the wash. They started moving up towards the gate where the Bureau of Land Management had their gate, and they basically kept moving up towards the gate, and they said over the loudspeaker, the Bureau of Land Management over the loudspeaker said to disperse, or they were going to use force. And at that point, the crowd was not dispersing. It was moving towards the gate. I thought they were going to shoot the protesters, shoot me. They had guns pointed at me. Me personally, standing up on the overpass. So at that time, it made sense to me to take cover. And that's what I did. I took cover, made sure my rifle was operable, and watched the situation unfold. They went up to the gate. They never crashed through the gate, never threw rocks or anything. They went up to the gate, stood there for a little bit, and a few minutes later, we watched the sheriff couple deputies, walk into the wash and walk up to the front gate, started talking to the protesters down there. It was probably about 200 yards away. So I wasn't sure what they were saying, what was going on. But a little while after that, I watched the people in camouflage, the agents, back out, egress out with the rifles on the crowd, and they left. A little while after that, the sheriffs took down the gate and escorted the cowboys up to where the cattle were, and they let the cattle loose, and the BLM federal agents left the area. We watched them leave in a convoy. There's probably about 200 vehicles, helicopters, a whole compound worth of federal funding. And at that point, I realized a Reuters photographer had snapped a picture of me on the bridge, and it was going viral at that moment all over the place. We left. We went back to Idaho that day. So, I mean, really, I was only in Nevada for less than, way less than almost 24 hours, really. Got back home, saw that it was going viral on the internet, saw it was going viral on the news. Was kind of surprised nobody showed up. Nobody called to ask why, what happened. Media started running with their narrative, right-wing extremist militia, violent extremists, that whole thing. Never did hear from the FBI at the time. I saw that they had opened an investigation into what happened, but nobody. I was always kind of waiting for him to show up at the door, but nobody ever did contact me and ask what happened that day.
And no shots were ever fired there?
No, nope. I think there was restraint on all sides.
Right. And
honestly.
there was no aggression of any kind on the part of the protesters?
No, there was no rocks thrown. There was no, they were singing the national anthem with their hands up in a wash.
Right.
So.
And when you went down there, this was before you got involved with the Three Percenters, right?
Yeah, I wasn't in any militia group, organization, anything like that. It was just me and two of my buddies.
Mm-hmm.
That came later. The 3%. I didn't even really know what the 3% was at the time. Friend of mine got a hold of me on the internet and said, "Hey, they're debating whether or not you're a federal agent on a Facebook page, and it's pretty funny. You should go read it." And so he sent me a link, and it was a 3% page, and kind of told everybody, I'm right here. I'm an open book. If you got any questions. And ultimately, the Idaho chapter reached out to me. Started talking with them boys, and looked into 3% more, just to see what exactly it meant and what it represented. I got into Mike Vanderbo. He was what I would call the founder of the modern 3% movement. He had a lot of writings. He had a blog. I started reading what he was saying, and he happened to write a blog about what happened at the ranch that day. And he equated it to exactly what he meant by the 3%. Normal, everyday Americans who value their Constitution and their rights and their neighbors' rights as much as their own, more importantly, and are willing to defend them and stand in that gap and show up when need be. He said what happened that day was exactly what he envisioned. And I should make a point, he specifically pointed out the restraint that we showed, not firing unless fired upon. Mm-hmm. And that resonated with me, having been in the position and sitting there watching and being in that moment. I thought to myself, did you do anything to make sure this didn't happen? As you're sitting there in that situation, at least that's what I started to think about. And I had to be honest with myself. I hadn't done anything. I was a frustrated electrician that saw some stuff he didn't like and just showed up in response. Right. And so that whole don't fire unless fired upon and actually working towards not allowing these kind of things to happen resonated with me. And so Mike Vanderbo, the guy that formed 3%, said that I was a 3%er. I didn't. So I decided that I was. He was probably right. Ended up joining that organization for a couple years. Was his own lead, helped organize, and really just about preparedness, right? Community preparedness, communications, what happens if the phones go off and the lights go out, that kind of stuff. Really just about community preparedness and emergency response, right? And eventually I was indicted about 2 years later. Multiple felonies. I was facing over 100 years in federal prison.
For just being there? I mean, what were the charges?
They all based around conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States and conspiracy to extort the federal government, assault on a Fed, threatening a Fed, obstruction of a court order, few enhancements, weapon enhancements, 924Cs, which is carry or use of a firearm in a crime of violence. 2 of those, and you hit mandatory minimum life in prison. So facing life in prison, was taken down to Las Vegas. Had to wait quite a while. They put us in solitary confinement, tried to break us. Eventually, they let us out of solitary confinement and offered us a plea agreement for 10 years, which is hard when you're looking at, dying in there. But told them I don't negotiate with terrorists and I'll see you in trial. And that's what we did. I went through 2 federal trials. First one was we got acquitted on the conspiracy charges first. The jury didn't buy that. Like I said, I had never talked to the Bundys. Nobody ever put me in that position and told me to hold them at gunpoint while they got the cows back, like the indictment said. So hung jury on the rest of the charges in that trial. It was 8-4 to acquit, but ultimately we ended up having to go through another trial. I always kind of thought that was double jeopardy. I learned a lot. I was naive. I thought we had a right to a speedy trial. Thought we had a lot of rights that we don't necessarily have. So got a crash course in the judicial system. And second trial came around, and that time was acquitted on all but 2 of the charges, threatening and assault. Those 2 final charges were 11-1 to acquit. So there was 1 holdout juror. At that point, the judge decided to let us go to a halfway house and get ready for a third trial. They were going to put us in with the Bundys. They had broke us into 3 tiers. So we were what they called the gunmen. And they were going to put the 2 of us, some of the other guys had been fully acquitted, but there was 2 of us that had 2 charges left. So they were going to put us 2 in with the Bundys and try us for a third time. At that time, some friends in the state legislature wrote a letter. About 53 legislators signed it, and it basically said that they believed there was a miscarriage of justice occurring with the third trial, asking the DOJ to investigate the prosecutors and look into the case. They all signed that, and they brought it to Raul Labrador, Congressman Labrador. He was our congressman at the time. He wrote a cover letter and delivered it to Sessions, AG at the time. And shortly after that, they offered me a misdemeanor plea agreement. And I was still exposed to about 30 plus years. Still had 2 of the enhancements there. So if I got hit with both of those enhancements, I could have still been going for life. So I took the misdemeanor, obviously, and went home. So I went from facing 100 plus years in prison, multiple felonies, down to a misdemeanor, and got home and started to try to rebuild my life and work and get out of the hole. Also reformed the 3%, and this time decided to try to take it a little bit in a different direction. Prior there was other people running it, and it was ran in a different way. I decided to create a board of representatives from around the state, and let that board vote on what we do and don't do, where we involve ourselves, and how we involve ourselves. Collected people from around the state that I trusted, and I trusted their instincts, and who agreed with me and ideologically congruent, and started to build something new. 3%, it's kind of a free association thing, right? You can jump on Amazon and grab a patch, and all of a sudden you're a 3%er, but there's very little ideological congruency out there unless people are willing to go look at what Mike Vanderbo said and what the basis was in the beginning. So we wanted to do something more organized and more structured, and have a broader impact, really create a statewide network, really. And that's about all it is. We preach small teams, form a small team, get prepared for an emergency, man-made or otherwise, and be prepared to respond and help your community. And that's all it is. We're not going out and doing the traditional 500 people on a firing line FTX stuff that a lot of people like to do. We just say, hey, if an emergency comes about, it's easier to deal with in a small team of friends who are prepared. And so that's what we encourage people to do. Now, the other thing that we do at a state level is politics and working within the system to affect policy through networking with policymakers, right? I wanted to show the state that it's one thing to be prepared for some sort of catastrophe, or Chinese paratroopers coming in or whatever, but really the battle is a political one, is legislation. If we're going to keep the republic as we know it, we have to be involved and really look at the laws and what they're doing and the policies and what government is actually doing, and influence that and work with them to, make sure that legislation isn't going to be used to usurp due process or constitutional rights, and have a conversation and talk.
That's really what you just said there. That's really interesting because, when I talked to Basil Fernamos, who had been a 3%er, and I've spoken offline to some other people that have been involved with 3%ers. And one thing that I've seen in every other 3%er that I've talked about is that they don't believe that there's a political solution ultimately.
Black pilled.
Right. And so, they think that the only solutions ultimately are going to be taking over the, what local, state, or, really local and state where it's focused, but taking over local and state governments. And so you've gotten involved in politics, and so you're kind of taking both paths simultaneously, which is interesting. I haven't seen that. One thing that you said yesterday is you said that that you don't believe that you're militia, and
no,
so
to me, militia has a meaning, right? It has a definition. It has militia is rank, file, orders. There's a lot of things, and we do none of those things, right? We're ran by a board. I don't even have a vote. They can vote me out anytime. I've got a veto, right? I can call for a vote and I can veto. The rest of them votes. It's now I do believe it behooves us to understand things that would apply to the militia should the governor call and form a militia. should the need be. If the governor says, okay, because in our state constitution it says everybody's the militia, it can be called up, right? 18 to whatever. And if that were to happen, I think it behooves us to be fluent in the things that would be necessary. How to operate a rifle, how to read a map, how to use the radio. If there's some emergency and the governor calls us all up and we're all standing there trying to learn how to read maps, it's not going to be good. So I think it's good to know those things. But to act as a militia,
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a little different definition than what I think the culturally accepted definition of militia is, which is it's kind of a loose definition to describe a group of people that come together to work on their gunmanship and their military type training, and talk about overthrowing the government. I think that's generally kind of
well, I've been to some militia meetings, right? And there is actual militia in Idaho, right? There's the Idaho Lightfoot Militia. There's groups out there that call themselves militia, and they call themselves captain, and they however that works. But I think that a legitimate militia is we're kind of getting into organized militia versus unorganized militia and what
sure. And we don't need to get too deep into that.
Sure. I just think that if you're gonna put on a uniform, call yourself a captain and say I'm the militia, then cool, go be the militia. But that's not what I am, and that's not how we run our organization. Frankly, that's the thing. Is there is no orders chain of command within my organization.
Right.
There's representatives who vote, and it's ran as a board. It's a not-for-profit. We do a lot of different things. So
I have one other question on that, which is something that I've seen. I've heard a lot of accounts of here in Michigan. There was a militia group. It was really a wannabe militia group that was 3/4 Fed assets and confidential informants, but that put together this pretend plot to kidnap the governor. But when I talked to Basil Furnamos too, he said that infiltration was really a problem, whether they were infiltrated by Feds, CIA, FBI, DIA, who knows.
But, I'd hate to speculate, but whatever. Right.
people that seem to have ulterior motives, and particularly to identify people who have a proclivity towards violent solution, whatever, which isn't really a solution, but a proclivity towards violence, and then essentially encouraging and entrapping them in that so that they can manufacture a crime around them.
That legitimately is something that has been happening for a long time, not just within the militia movement, but I mean, you can take a look at any kind of movement over the years that maybe doesn't agree with the status quo and possibly dissident in nature. You're gonna see the same play from the FBI, from those people, and that really is just getting in there and doing what they do, right? I mean, the Fed napping, like they call it there. I had actually seen a couple of those guys around on the internet, right? So I'll just say they weren't the brightest bulbs, and a lot of bravado. Mm-hmm. And so when I see that bravado, that kind of running at the mouth thing, I chalk it up to one of two things. Either they're not too smart,
Right.
or they're trying to direct in a direction that I don't want to go. Either way, I don't have time for them. And either way, I show them the door.
Right. So I got a few comments here. Rayanne says, happy Friday. Pat says, love your podcasts. And Rayanne says, this is very interesting. I've never heard much about the 3%ers. So let's talk about the, how you got into politics and how you came to know what was going on within Kent's campaign. Because a big part of what we're going to be talking about here is Joe Kent's campaign for Congress in Washington. So
when I first started when I saw that there was an avenue to start participating in the political process, I had gone to the Capitol to thank those legislators that signed that letter. And Representative Moon introduced me from the floor.
This is Dorothy Moon, who's
yes.
now state chair. Okay.
Yep. She introduced me from the floor and had me stand up in the gallery, and I got a standing ovation. It was surreal. I was watching the body of our government clap for me not giving in, and she even said, for what he did in Nevada and the Constitution, and we're glad he's home, and blah blah blah.
It's been really moving.
I saw them clap, and I realized that I could probably go talk to each one of these people and have a conversation, and so right then I saw that maybe we had an ability to get in and basically build relationships, and see if that would work and what we could do with it. And so a couple of my buddies who were in the organization, one was medically retired vet, and the other was self-employed. I got with them and I said, hey, do you guys want to try to get in here and really look at legislation and see what we can do? And they said, yeah. And so we set out right then, and we were at the Capitol a lot. And basically we just went in and started asking them what they were working on, laws, talking Constitution. A lot of it was, opening the dialogue with what actually happened in 2014 and why I went, and and create a relationship from there, and start to actually look at legislation, and started asking them to see the bills before they went to committee, what they were working on. If we saw something that was concerning to us, we would point it out and let them know what we thought that an unintended consequence may be of that language, and had some victories, made some good relationships, and really just started to participate in that process and look at things through a different avenue. A lot less screaming at the building with bullhorns, and calling and making an appointment in a meeting, and actually using conversation to actually try to make a difference, a real difference. And that's where it kind of started. As far as Joe Kent, being at the head of the 3%, it's I kind of have to know what's going on in the world, and so pay attention to a lot of things. I had known who Nick and America First, Nick's America First. I knew
this is Nick,
all of that.
And this is Nick Fuentes. And
yeah,
right.
I knew about this movement, and I had seen, back then he wasn't quite so overt, probably, but I could see the underlying,
Should we play this video about Nick Fuentes, this 3-minute video, just to kind of give an introduction?
People, sure.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So this is about a 3.5-minute video. And before we do that, just a couple. Rand says, militias get a negative rap. Not always the case, but all over a negative feeling from people. That's true. And Lauren says, in that conversation process between activists and lawmakers is what we are now being told to abandon in favor of bullhorns, even though we all have evidence that the bullhorns don't work, that's what's happening within the party, which is just crazy. So within the Republican Party, and this is what I've been describing, is that the party is becoming like, they're trying to make what we're seeing is actual, instead of infiltrating the militias, or maybe they're doing that too, they've actually infiltrated the party, and they're trying to make the party into a militia, essentially. And it's kind of crazy. So let's watch
an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
That just occurred to me. I haven't even thought of that before. So if you're watching and you want to disagree with me, you're welcome to. So let's watch this video about
I went to Charlottesville. They told me it was over when we did the Groiper War and I did the cookie joke about the Holocaust. They told me it was over after Stop the Steal when I was there. And I had my money frozen. I was put on the no-fly list. And then when they thought it couldn't get any more over, I was there. And I think it just proved the point that I could go on InfoWars with Kanye West and say, I love Hitler, and not lose a single supporter.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
Yeah, I piss on your Talmud. You think I'm anti-Semitic? You think I care what Antichrist believes? When there is a global hegemon threatening everybody at gunpoint not to make any moves, people act differently. And the only problem right now is it's the wrong people running it. I'm not against America having an empire. I'm against Jews running it. How are you going to achieve a regime change when the country is triumphant? Has that ever happened before in history?
So that, I think that gives enough of an introduction. I mean, for me, it's really hard to watch.
It is. It's almost like a bad cartoon. I don't know. It is hard to watch.
So that is.
But having said that, let me say this real quick. I don't believe, as vile as some of that is, as much as I disagree with it and the premise of it, I don't believe it should be censored. Mm-hmm. And I'll say I had to go look and search and find where I could find these folks speak their mind, so that I could understand where they were coming from, so I could choose whether or not I would associate. And for that to work, we have to have free speech. They have to be able to speak their mind and say what they believe, so that I can know whether or not I agree with them or disagree. So I want to be clear about that. I'm in no way advocating hate speech laws or censoring in any way. I think we all need to say what we think and unblur the lines, right? When we censor like that and we shove it into the dark, it makes it easier for guys like Nick to blur the lines. And I think that's a big part of the problem. But I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
Right. And I wouldn't be surprised if my channel started getting hits, from YouTube or something because of, just for playing it. But I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I'm choosing to play it, is because I think we need to understand who he is and let the man speak for himself. And when we do, we see, he's clearly a white supremacist. He's clearly anti-Semitic, like very deliberately in your face. So there's no hiding it at all. He's really the one that caused the bulk of the problems in Charlottesville. The
idea, he's definitely the face behind a lot of the ideas that are accumulating. And a lot of it starts with that unite the right thing that started in Charlottesville, right? And the average conservative hears that and they're like, yeah, unite the right, because the left is so big and organized and this and that and everything else. We do have to unite, and so they find this place where they can preach that in and push that and say, hey guys, let's not punch right. We don't want to punch right, punch left. And I think that, I've always been against unity for unity's sake. I have my thoughts and my beliefs, and if you agree with that, then great, we can talk about it, and if not, that's fine too. We can agree to disagree. But unity for unity's sake, that's a dangerous slope.
Yeah, that's more of a Marxist ideology. So we are, as conservatives, we understand that each one of us is an individual, and we're free to think and work through issues as individuals and vote our own conscience and speak our conscience. That we all have got, our consciences are all informed and wired, not just by God, but by our experiences as well. And, and so we have to be free. And the founders really understood this. We have to be free to hear, speak, read, to inform our conscience. And in so doing, we'll unite ultimately around what is true. Right. But that's a natural and organic process, not a forced one. And when you start talking about we need to unite, the only way to do that, externally is by force. So,
well, and what are we uniting with, right? Are we uniting with somebody who doesn't believe in religious freedom, doesn't believe in due process for all Americans, right? I have a standing rule, right? If your ideology would take away due process, if you're advocating for taking away due process from another American for any reason, I reject that on its face. But anyway, so I had to kind of know what's going on out there in the world and what these movements are and whatnot. And I paid attention to Nick. I knew what he was up to and what he was about. And I saw that they started to approach these elected officials kind of not necessarily in an open manner. They would say, we're America first. And these elected officials or people running, candidates, would automatically equate that to Trump and not really ask any more questions few levels deep. And it happened to Janice McGeachin, our lieutenant governor, I think. And, the candidate sees these young, energetic, supposedly Trump supporting, America first, organized. They know the media. They're just seeing votes, right? They're just seeing Trump and votes. And I think that's a little dishonest of them, and always kind of did. But when I watched what actually happened to Joe Kent, I started to think maybe it was not just organic, maybe a little more nefarious than I had thought. Joe, they did the same thing to Joe. They approached him. They said, we're America first. We're Trump, and he was a Trump endorsed candidate. And Joe sees these young guys ready to get after it and get the votes and help, and says, sure. Eventually, people see, whoever, somebody throws a video in front of them and goes, no, these guys are a little out there or whatever, or they have some ideas that maybe we don't agree with, or maybe you don't agree with. At that point, he backed off and he said, I don't advocate for that stuff, and I'm not with them. At that point, Nick and the rest of them put on this full on operation, almost is what it seemed like. They doubled down in support of Nick, almost knowing their own toxicity, or I'm sorry, of Kent. They started going to his events, flying the America First flag. They were very present, and even though he had said, I don't condone that and I don't agree with it, they kind of doubled down knowing their own toxicity. And the left used that to say, okay, he's a white nationalist. He's part of this America First white nationalism thing. And
So what you're saying, what I understand from what you're saying is that, so Nick Fuentes, he has a pack called the America First Pack.
yeah, he formed it after CPAC. CPAC threw him out.
Right.
And he went right out and he formed this foundation called America First.
Mm-hmm. And then he basically, he brought people in, he trained them, right? And in the same way, just like, this using, basically the same narratives and stuff that he's presenting there, which is openly anti-Semitic, openly white supremacist. And, so he's got these kind of this little group, and he actually he deployed them to Joe Kent's campaign, right? Of
right.
And they call themselves America First, and they are infiltrating Joe Kent's campaign, right?
Yeah, and they did, and it wasn't even, at first they tried to actually get in there organically and be within the campaign, right? And then when Joe realized what they were, got told what they were, whatever, he tried to separate himself from them. And when he did that, Nick went into sending everybody to the events, double down on your support of Joe, make sure that everybody knows that we support Joe. And that gave the left the ability to say, okay, well, Joe's in with the white nationalists. But then on the other end, they were actually in conservative circles saying Joe's a CIA agent and all about, he's not really America First, he's Israel first, or whatever, however they say it. So Nick burned him on both ends, and it looked like a political op to me. Later, I watched Tucker talking to Tulsi Gabbard, and he said there's no telling me what happened to Joe Kent wasn't a CIA op. And that's kind of when it clicked for me. I figure, one, the guy, he's got connections to the CIA, supposedly, or whatever. I think he would know. And it was interesting that he was so blatant about it. He just threw it out there. He said, there's no telling me it wasn't a CIA op. And so once I started to look at it through that lens, and I'm not going to speculate. I don't know who's CIA and who ain't, and what's an op and what ain't. But when I started to look at it through that lens, if what they did to Joe was an op, then I think the whole thing's an op. And
so you think you're speculating that that Nick Fuentes himself is possibly an informant or an operative of in some level. I mean, certainly he is an operative in the sense that he infiltrated a campaign with the clear intention to destroy that campaign and to cause Joe Kent to lose. So, yeah. I mean, in that sense, he's an operative. It's just, the question is, was he an operative of the government? Somebody was paying him. He formed a PAC. There was money that went into that PAC from somewhere.
Well, and it came from some reclusive French guy donated a bunch of Bitcoin the day before he committed suicide, right? I mean, I read that in Gray State, right? But
oh my gosh, wow.
And again, I try not to speculate. I'm not going to point fingers. He could himself be. He could be being influenced by. He could be, it's hard to say. But all I know is that he got thrown out of CPAC, went and started a foundation that directly correlated him to our president, threw on a MAGA hat, and then started spewing anti-Semitic, racist nonsense, Christian nationalist stuff, and all while supposedly supporting one of the most pro-Israel presidents of my lifetime.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
Right.
So yeah, I just want, in speaking out about it and talking about it, one, unblur the lines. That's my thing. Let's not have blurry lines here. And two, a fair warning to Republicans that just because they're coming in and saying America first doesn't mean that they are anything to do with Trump or real conservative values, right? A lot of these guys believe in a monarchy. They don't believe in the constitutional republic as we define it, and they don't want it. I look at a lot of them the same way I would look at the radical left or radical Marxists, what have you. I think that they all want to destroy our constitutional republic to build in their own image, whether that's the far right or the far left.
Right.
So,
that's where,
in the interest of unblurring lines and warning good conservatives to not fall for it and not play with fire, because they will burn you.
Joe Brandis says Fuentes sounds a lot like Richard Spencer in the alt-right movement, which is really along those lines. A big part of the operation that I've been researching is just this, that there's a lot of different objectives, just like the left. I mean, they don't have just one objective, but one of them is to drive the party so far to the right that it no longer becomes a viable electoral alternative to the Democrats. I mean, the way that we win, and especially given that there is some amount of election fraud, is we need to outvote it. We need to form a large enough coalition that includes independents, moderates, and conservatives, and people, ultra MAGA or whatever, people that are further right. And so, we have to be able to form this broad coalition, and they're trying to prevent that from happening by driving the party so far to the right that nobody could even hold their nose and vote for them, because they just don't represent them, especially, when you're talking about overt racism and anti-Semitism. Nobody can support that. I do want to get to this video because it's a short video, and but in it is was it James Vincent Fox? Is that who's in this video?
Yeah.
And he was connected. I want you to explain that. So he was connected with Riley, right? A guy named Riley.
They're all kind of, loosely affiliated and connected. I think Fox was or is the treasurer for Nick's America First Foundation.
Okay.
Riley, he sports the America First pin. He seems a lot less outspoken. He doesn't have a podcast like Fox or Nick.
So that's not David J. Riley. This Dave Riley is a different. Is that right?
Yeah. So you got David Riley. He was affiliated with Identity Europa. He was in Charlottesville stuff. And then you've got Fox, who is, I think, more closely affiliated with Nick.
Right. And part of the reason why I'm bringing this in is because these guys actually got involved in Idaho inter-party politics, right? They got involved in the Republican Party. Dave Riley in particular, he got involved. He was hired by Brent Reagan's Idaho Freedom Foundation, which is a longstanding conservative think tank in Idaho. But since Brent Reagan has taken it over, he's been on this mission to drive the party so far to the right that ranked choice voting actually would have a wider and wider appeal to people. Whether that's
which is really the problem, right? And that's what they're doing in our state right now is people on the left or moderate, whatever they want to call themselves, are using Fox and Nick and the Groyper attempt at getting into politics to travel around the state and say, look, these white nationalist Nazis are trying to take over the Republican Party and politics in our state, and these Christian nationalist extremists or whatever they're saying. And the only answer is ranked choice voting and open primaries.
Right.
And they're using that fear tactic to scare the crap out of normal farming conservatives in the middle of Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're telling them the answer is to sign the petition for ranked choice voting or open primaries.
Yeah, and we saw how in Alaska, which is deep red, how they just, Sarah Palin was unable to become a U.S. congressman in favor of a Democrat because of ranked choice voting. It's just the whole thing. Even though Sarah Palin had the most votes on the first ballot, it's crazy. Yep. And so, but that's and I've been told even just last week, somebody said, "Well, how could you include Idaho on this list? It's super conservative." It's because the same operation is going on there and in other red states in order to drive the party so far to the right that people flee the party, and something breaks, and that's what they're trying to do, is just break stuff. And so I think
it does seem like agents of chaos.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's what the left does. It's a leftist operation. What we're seeing is it's a far left operation. I've been saying that from the very beginning, since January, when I published my first report on Michigan. This is a far left operation to infiltrate the grassroots and drive the party so far to the right, make it, destroy the party, take out everybody that has been involved in the party, that knows how to get stuff done, drive away the donors, so that who would want to donate to a party that behaves that way. In Idaho in particular, and also it sounds like throughout the Pacific Northwest, there's been this infiltration, and Solomon Yu and Kerry McQuiston and Joel Pulaski that I had on the show in Oregon, they talked about Don Powers, who is clearly a racist, and he's one of the leaders in the party. He just ran for RNC committeeman and almost won. And so this is not just Idaho, and I don't think it's just in the Pacific Northwest. We haven't seen this kind of deliberately overt racism so much in other states, but it's the same type of operation where they're infiltrating, they're creating a stench around a candidate or the party, and they're just trying to blow it up. And
did you see what happened in Arizona, where the young Republicans invited Nick to speak at an event that they were holding? No. So young Republicans were putting on an event. It was sponsored by the actual GOP. A lot of GOP groups had sponsored this event, and they invited Nick to come speak at it. And then once everybody kind of realized what was happening, they all started pulling their support for this event, and the whole party is fighting about whether Nick's okay or not, or really a Nazi or not, and it just creates this chaos. And frankly, I mean, his own words, I've watched him talk about it. He gets off on it. He's like, oh yeah, we pop our head up in Arizona and everybody loses it. We pop our head up over in Washington and everybody freaks out. And he for whatever reason, he's pretty open about how he gets off on it.
And I'll just share the video on the show notes on my Substack, because we're running out of time and we do have a hard out here in a couple minutes. So I will be posting, it'll be tonight. I'm heading off to my son's golf match. And so after I get back tonight, I will be posting that on Substack. That's biggertruth.substack.com, biggertruth.substack.com. And I will have this obviously this conversation that we just had, but I'll also include a few videos that I think are very enlightening as to, in their words, in the words of these people that have been involved within the Idaho Republican Party, and that have represented and actually been hired and paid by the Idaho Freedom Foundation, what exactly their intentions are. And it's pretty shocking stuff. It's extremely shocking stuff.
I'll say this: if I were to go on a podcast or have my own podcast, and I were to say, "Hey, elected officials in Idaho, this is a right-wing takeover, and if you don't get in line, you're going to be sorry," the FBI would be at my door, right? That would be very close to threatening elected officials, close enough for them to take me into custody, I think. But for whatever reason, some people are getting a pass, and I just hope that good Republicans, one, don't fall for the fear tactics. Open primaries and ranked choice voting are not the answer. Open dialogue and debate on ideas and the party platform is the answer. And don't play with fire, because they're, just because they're young and they know the internet, and you think they're going to bring you votes. Don't play with fire.
Absolutely. And I think the solution, and I've been saying this now for the last couple of weeks, that the solution is that we become statesmen. And I think you've demonstrated that by getting involved in, reading the bills, talking with your representatives, giving them your feedback, actually engaging in dialogue with them, not making demands, but making requests, and by, just by, engaging in that dialogue. And as a result, you earn respect, and they actually want to listen to you. And so you're coming together as a group, and you're doing this in a productive way, and that's what statesmen do. And you're not shouting people down, you're not threatening to overthrow anything, you're not you're
encouraging a theocracy or an ethno state.
Exactly. And not getting involved in in really crazy ideologies, which white or Christian nationalism is. When you actually look at what the leaders of Christian nationalism, with what they're saying, it is crazy. It's not Christian. It's not even patriotic. I mean, it's not constitutional.
It's not. And the problem I've found is a lot of people go, they've been browbeat by the left for so long. They go, well, I am white and I am a nationalist, or I am Christian and I am a nationalist. And so, sure, fine, I'm a Christian nationalist. Well, that's not what most people mean when they say it. When they're talking about it, they're not just talking about a random Christian who happens to love their nation. They're talking about guys who openly say, we are the Christian Taliban. We want to roll women's rights back 100 years. These kind of things. And again, they're hard to watch and it's hard to take serious, but I mean, it's what they're saying. And whether or not they're even serious, normal people out there are watching that, looking at that, and they're correlating the two, right? And I think we need to be clear and look at the videos, unblur the lines, watch what they say with their own mouth, and then sure, if you agree, then fine, go agree. But if not, then maybe speak out about it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like we could just keep on talking for a long time. There's so much more, and even to your story that we haven't even touched on. So if you'd like to see more from Eric, you let me know wherever you are. If you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, X, please like, subscribe, whatever you need to do. Get the notifications, so that, because that'll help other people to see this as well, and help you to see when we go live next. So thanks again, Eric. Really appreciate you. How can people find you, whether it's on Twitter or social media? Is there any way to?
Yeah, just hit me up on the old X.
Right.
Eric Parker.
Yep. And you can find him. He's I think you can see that he's following me as well. So I've reposted some of your stuff, and I'll continue to. You do post.
Appreciate it, Scott.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We will be in touch, and until next time, thank you all for joining us.